When Yvonne Walker-Keshik steps foot on what was once Holy Childhood of Jesus boarding school in Harbor Springs, painful memories come flooding back.
Everything that was Native American, they tried to destroy.
Yvonne was one of thousands of Native American kids, many of them Odawa children, sent to this Catholic boarding school between 1829 and 1983.
And I often wondered, how other people, other kids who went to the school, how did they deal with it? And I know some of them didn't. Some of them became alcoholics, drug addicts, committed suicide. I know a lot of them just couldn't make it. So it was pretty tough.
Students couldn't speak their language or practice traditions. Yvonne says she was beaten by nuns as she struggled to learn.
I spent a lot of afternoons, lunch hours, staring at the blackboard because I couldn't do the problem on the board. And when she'd come back and she'd find me still standing there and the problem's not done, she would grab me by my hair and use me for an eraser, drag me back and forth across the blackboard, until she erased the numbers.
In the 19th and 20th centuries, the United States funded more than 350 boarding schools with the goal of assimilating and separating the tribes. Holy Childhood was one of the longest running. Students often describe themselves as survivors of physical and even sexual abuse. What do you think the legacy of this place is going to be?
For those of us who went there, it's kind of like it's a bad history in the history of Native people.
Children ended up at these schools a number of ways. For some families, it was the only way to keep their children fed and with a roof over their heads. Others were forcibly removed from their homes. Yvonne and her 4 siblings were taken after her single father was charged with child neglect.
The judge told him that he had to put us in this boarding school or put us up for adoption. Well, he didn't want us taken away from him, and so he put us in school.
What was it like here?
It was run by a bell. When the bell rang, you went to bed, and you brushed your teeth, and you put away your clothes, and you hung them up, and your senior made sure that you put on your pajamas and got in bed, made sure you were there, then they went and did the same thing. If you didn't want to do what they wanted to do, they were allowed to hit us. They could slap us if they wanted to.
When did you realize something was really wrong?
When some of the kids were speaking a language. When kids were speaking a language, then they got slapped up, jerked around, and they were told not to say words like that they have to speak English.
What happened to your identity here at the school?
It kind of made us ashamed of who we were. They made us feel bad because of who we were. Being called names all the time and being put down all the time. And we noticed, too, that they paid more attention to the lighter-haired kids and the lighter-skinned kids. If they took a shine to liking you, then you got to do special things, stay up a little later, or you didn't get yelled at, or you didn't get knocked around. But if they didn't like you, then you got the opposite.
You used the phrase "knocked around." How much physical abuse was happening here?
There was a lot. The boys had a razor strap. They always talked about the razor strap. So I guess the boys were given spankings with a razor strap. And then and those strappings were administered by the brother or the priest or the nun.
It wasn't just physical abuse. There was mental abuse, too. Yvonne had a crippling handicap growing up, one she didn't let the nuns know about for years out of fear. Finally, she was able to get surgery, but just weeks after, her doctor committed suicide. She still remembers what the nun told her that day.
She said, "You better pray for that doctor that did surgery on your feet. It's because of you he killed himself." And I did. I prayed for that doctor for the longest time, thinking that it was my fault. And then she would do the same thing when my grandma died. Your grandma's in hell. You better pray for her. She died.
How do the things that you experienced here continue to impact you?
I am extremely anxious. I don't have anxiety attacks, but I'm anxious all the time.
For years, elders like Yvonne have shared these stories. But it wasn't until a terrifying discovery of more than 1,000 bodies found in mass graves at similar schools in Canada that a reckoning began. This past June, the U.S. government announced a national investigation. Eric Hemingway is the archivist for the Little Traverse Bay bands of Odawa Indians. He has been uncovering school records and artifacts for decades.
This one.
A 4-year-old.
4-year-old.
When Holy Childhood was demolished in 2007, he was able to save a few pieces from the school.
This particular piece has gotten a lot of attention. It draws a lot of memories from people who went to the school. Whether, the signals, end of a class, going to bed, mealtime, or other experiences associated, just with the sound. So this is one of our more, I would say, powerful pieces, and we were able to get that before the school was demolished.
Would students use this? The nuns?
Nuns and the priest. And Holy Childhood it was a Catholic school throughout its entire life. It's an actual photo of the school before it was torn down in the 1950s. You can see just the sheer mass of this. It's huge.
Yeah.
It was the largest building in Harbor Springs. You couldn't miss it.
Wow.
And thousands of kids cycled through that school during its lifetime, from the late 1880s until 1983.
Is it strange for you to look at this image and then know what that area looks like now?
Yeah, I live here in Harbor Springs. I grew up, with this in my youth, knowing what the school is, and now seeing the school gone, yeah, it impacts me. I'm conflicted because I hear the stories from people who went there and what they experienced, and I don't want anybody to be triggered or, relive that trauma. But then I don't want people to forget what happened, because there's no marker, there's nothing that indicates that was an Indian boarding school. You would walk by there and not know at all. But the impacts we feel every day in our community.
That was one of the first thoughts I had when I stepped onto the property was, where's the memorial? Where's the plaque that tells a tourist coming through what actually happened here?
There was a historic marker there, a state historic marker, and when the building was demolished in 2007, unfortunately the marker went with it. Here's another one of the photos from the reporter.
This is inside the school?
Yep, this is inside the school. We're trying to identify some of these kids, and it's hard because some of these people, they want to move past that.
To what extent do you think the federal government was successful in its mission?
One of the answers is it was successful in that many of us don't speak our native language. I'm struggling to learn my first language of Anishinaabe. But in a sense, they're not successful because I'm striving to learn that. Those elements of us as Anishinaabe are still out there. The language, the customs, the traditions. So in that way, they failed.
How the U.S. ultimately rights these wrongs remains an open question.
What did these schools represent?
These schools represent, in my mind as a tribal historian and also as an Anishinaabe person, the hardest point of forced assimilation. That the federal government had always looked at Native people as needing to be quote-unquote civilized. We were deemed savages, heathens, pagans, and this idea of civilizing us was at the very beginning of the creation of the United States. And this progressed with policy and then finally into this creation of a system of schools that would take kids from their homes and force them to assimilate into Euro-American culture and really banish their language, their traditions, their appearance, their customs.
Do you see real acknowledgement happening?
I have to be optimistic and say yes. There has to be this moving forward of acknowledgement and having the survivors and the tribes tell their story about this. So in Native history and Native story in place, we have to be hopeful. We have to be optimistic and move forward.
The fact that survivors are still here to tell their stories, that this land is here, that people have a sense of community, is that part of what has brought people healing?
Yeah, absolutely. That, as we speak today, Native populations only make up 1% of the U.S. population. We're the smallest minority. So whenever we are in existence, that's a victory. Then you go through these battles, whether it's forced removal, Indian boarding schools, forced assimilation, and you're still here in the land of your ancestors going forward, that's a powerful thing.
When you grapple with this history, would you say your overriding emotion is one of pride that your people are still here, or are you angry?
My emotions vary all the time with this work. And, you know, when the news broke in Canada about the discoveries, it was anger, it was hurt, because I know it's not just Canada, it's here. So I deal with a lot of anger, I'm not going to lie. But then I also have an immense amount of pride and respect and humility and all of these things that I was instilled as a young boy out in Cross Village, that you can't let these things define you, this victimization and the trauma and the bad. You go forward. So that always wins out.
Holy Childhood has not responded to NBC News' request for comment. Fred Kiogma is a Marine Corps veteran, but says memories from Holy Childhood still haunt him.
What were those early days at Holy Childhood like?
It was a 3-story building, castle-like appearance, electricity, because we didn't have electricity growing up. I remember having to go there, and because my brothers were already been there, my 3 older brothers were already there, and I had wanted to go there. It was one of those family traditions that went there. My mom and dad went there, my grandparents went there. A lot of things that took place there were very rude awakening. The nuns took you, they had this table, and they stood you up and they just stripped you naked and washed from head to toe. The nuns telling us, you know, you got to wash till you get that color off. And we didn't know what that meant, because we're washed. I mean, we're clean. And you keep going till you get that brown off there. And then, you know, you get issued your clothes. You're assigned where you're going to be at, given a number. I was number 27.
Fred recalls getting locked in a freezing closet, racist remarks. A nun once forced him to eat another child's vomit.
We were sitting there, and a girl sitting across from me, she was trying to eat it. And if you don't mix cornmeal up sometime, it comes in clumps. It just does. And as a first, second grader, you know, she was already crying because the nun had told her, you keep eating it, you keep eating it. So the girl did. Oh, and she did. She swallowed it and must have hit one of them clumps, because then she's, not only that, but she vomited. And I just lost it. You know, I started giggling because she threw up. Then the nun came over and he said, you find it so funny, Freddie? Then you eat it. So I had to sit there and eat that girl's food that she just thrown up. She literally threw up. And I had to eat that soup, or that stuff, her vomit, and the cornmeal that caused it. And while I was doing that, my brother, Alan, he grabs my leg, you know, like this, and just first, second, third graders and stuff, and I'm eating this stuff, and I'm crying and stuff, and he keeps squeezing my leg, you know. I get done, and then we go to school, and we get out at recess because he goes somewhere else, and I ran up to him, and I was like, Alan, you know, why were you crying? Because he was crying, but he's holding my leg. I said, why were you crying? I'm the one that had to eat that puke. And he just looked at me, and he was quiet his whole life. He was even quiet then. And I kept bugging him. He finally turned around, and he said, little bro, he said, Mom said to take care of you and protect you. But he goes, I couldn't. He goes, that's why I was squeezing your leg. But I was mad at him, and he was trying to protect me. So yeah, that was 57 years ago. And I can remember his expressions, his tone, and how small I felt.
You were really young when you came to the school.
Yep.
Did you have a sense at that young age of what was happening to your identity?
Not so much as my identity. I just know when we got there, they shaved our pretty much the same haircut I got now. It's by no means did I have long hair, but it was one of those things that it was shaved. Everybody looked the same. But the identity was, I lost a lot of my language, a lot of it because was my mom and dad's first language. That was my grandparents' first language. And growing up on Indian Road, all of the tribal people out there, that was what they were talking. And you come here and yes, you already knew English, but in there you weren't allowed to even say it. You just get beat for it. But after 7 years of that, and you lose it, because if you don't use it, you lose it.
How do you feel the nuns viewed you and all of the other kids at the time?
It wasn't all the nuns. There were some nuns that were our go-to people. Those are the ones we snuck away from around to go get some love and comforting, like they're telling you, like, it's going to be all right. Like, no, it's not. Why is the nun over there slapping me? So what you learned was a very hard way of when you're corrected or you're slapped, you just suck it up. It shaped me in my early years to be very hard, very, very callous, I guess, when I look back on it and stuff. Because if you beat a child hard enough and long enough, they just quit crying.
How prevalent was that kind of physical abuse?
The
beatings, the being locked upstairs?
Prevalence would be, say, quite often. The prevalence of it was got to be so where you were used to it. I mean, you expected it.
Did you ever reach out to or write letters to family members? Telling them what was happening to you?
No. The only letters I remember writing were to the nice Chmookmonic, the white people, because they donated money to the school or clothes or something. Then you had to write a letter to them to thank them for a jacket. And I didn't get a jacket, but you had to write these letters because that's how they were getting some clothes, I guess. But I remember
you were writing false thank yous.
False thank yous to people I didn't see, benefactors, that I didn't get to see the new boots or the new shirt or the new jacket.
This was supposed to be a school, a place where you would learn and make friends.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the real purpose of Holy Childhood was?
Take the Indian out. It's to get rid of your culture, your heritage, your language, your ways of life, your beliefs. And the education side of it, you did learn. You learned really good, really quick, because you were being beat. You can take a group of prisoners and teach them to cut a tree down in 30 minutes with an axe if you beat them hard enough or anything.
How do your memories of your time there impact you now?
It's always bothered me my whole life, and I tried to talk to my mom about it first, 20s and 30s. And Mom, I think, had her own demons, and I think Grandma had her own demons, and you just don't talk about it, because you don't. You're believing God, and God would never allow that to happen. But it did happen, and it's one of those things that's tradition crosses generation. That's where you sent the Indian kids. But my daughter is now 42 years old, and she's now coming asking questions, and my son is asking questions. And I never told him about this growing up because I knew at the time, it was like, this can't be the way childhood is supposed to be. It can't be.
Survivors say the first step of healing is acknowledgement.
The best way I found out to deal with it was to learn to talk about it. And by meeting, when I meet my other friends who went to the school here, I talk with them about it. Just telling them that it's easier. It gets easier. The more you talk about it, the better you're going to feel. Because it wasn't our fault what happened to us there. I'm proud of who I am now. I'm proud that I survived it.
How have you been able to heal?
I don't know if I've been able to heal.
What needs to happen now?
Conversations need to happen. Real dialogue needs to happen. Those are the first steps. And then also respect for the people who lived it and are dealing with it, and that the boarding schools impacted, the entire community. That there is a reason why I don't speak my native language fluently. There is a reason that I don't know all of my customs and traditions. It was systematically taken out of my tribe and tribes throughout North America for over a century. That people, see a native person and have these expectations they're going to know all of this cultural knowledge. That's just not true. And it's largely true because it was systematically extracted out of our communities, and a lot of that extraction came through kids. So there's a bigger story than the immediate schools themselves. There's this system to make us non-native. That needs to come out as well, too.